I put this presentation together with a focus on soil, but also just science in general in architecture, realizing that there was actually a lot of science in architecture. Pretty much, you can probably give a whole course on just science in architecture. So I tried to put it together, and I wanted to start off just talking about my firm. So we're a six person team. We're located on Vermillion Street. We do mostly multifamily and mixed use. We also do office buildings. Our mission is to always have projects that positively affect our community through the design that we do. So you'll see that in all the projects that we do. It's very community driven, and that's always something that when a project comes through our front door, we always make sure it's something that fits with our mission. So one of those projects that you all might be familiar with is Vermilion Loss. This is the corner of Johnson Street and Vermilion Street. Our office is actually kind of like you see the neon sign right there. And this is something that not only did we design, but we also acted as the developer on the project. And for years, people would talk about more living downtown. And so we decided we were going to bring more living to downtown and develop our own. We're actually now developing other projects across the street. One thing that's great is we even have was activated by having it mixed use rather than just multifamily. The ground floor, we have a photographer who likes to take really cool pictures like this one. And then across the street, we are going to be developing this project, like phase 2 of Vermillion Loss. This one is called Cayenne, and we're hoping to get some support from the city later this month. And if that support happens, to be able to help pay for the infrastructure in the front and on the street, because it's an open ditch, which you don't see very much downtown. Actually, it's the only open ditch downtown. So we're asking the city to participate with us on the project, and hopefully they'll see the merit in it, because this is 36 dwelling units. The other one was 24. This is 7,000 square feet of commercial on the ground floor, and it's also 5 stories. This is the view. This is actually from a drone image, the view. But when we went to start building this thing, one thing that people don't realize is a 5-story building has a lot of weight. The top 4 floors are built of wood, and the ground is built of concrete, which is concrete, steel. Obviously, we have to have some sort of foundation. The foundation design on this particular project are drilled shafts that go 20 feet deep, and then you sit. So the building looks like it's this tall, right? It's almost 70 feet tall, but you actually have 20 feet of the building underground as well. And a lot of times when you get to high rises, you'll see a lot of that. But it's all building materials come from the earth at some point, right? So if it's wood, it was grown as usually pine in this area. Most of those pine trees are coming from North Louisiana or Alabama and Mississippi. The concrete is a little bit of a different story because you have limestone, so you're having to ship that in. And then steel, obviously, is also something that's being shipped in. So I'll talk a little bit about building materials. Before we can even get the design to build this tall, we have to figure out how to sit this in our soil. So we go out and we hire a geotech. We hire up for a geotech report. So we get an engineer who is a geoengineer to give us a report and make suggestions on how deep our footings need to be, how much pounds per square inch that would, what our design can hold on top of the footings of this. They also will give us a report for recommending how much even to put on our paving where we're parking. So this is usually what the process looks like. On this particular site, they go 30 feet. We like to do 30 feet when we get 4 or 5 stories. On this one, we didn't hit water, which was the first time we didn't hit water in Lafayette Parish, which is really interesting. We hit sand at 25 feet, And the report shows all of that. If it's a fatty clay, if it's sand, it'll tell you where the water is. Usually they'll use that report to calculate how much the soil can carry. This is more or less what the soil report looks like. This was a report for a project also downtown that we're working on, and you'll see right here that it comes to 30 foot right here. And then there's the labels, and it'll tell you how much pounds per square foot it holds up. This is your soil classification chart. So the soil classification chart, you'll see essentially a legend that's done what these different patches are meaning in the actual report. Another use of soil, at least historically, this is a project that's going to be the new welcome center for the city of Carencro. This was a 200-plus-year-old Acadian cottage that was found a block over. This actually predates the whole city of Carencro, which was more of built around the railroad. This was something from a Spanish land grant, that the backside of a Spanish land grant on the Vermilion River. And either the Babineau family or the Cormier family is what we found in our research. But you'll see this is called bouillage. It's a mixture of mud that's got a lot of clay in it, mixture of mud and Spanish moss. And the early French and Spanish settlers in the region would do this, and they would mix it all together. And the bottom part, which is not in the photograph, actually they have a handful of bricks. So that we think that was from trying to protect against insects. But the bricks obviously also come from clay, but they're biased. This was, I guess, sort of a cheaper way of creating mass in the building. The insulation value is actually not that high. It's more about having a mass as a heat sink. So what it does is it creates a microclimate on the interior of the building that's really just averaging out your fluctuation of temperature from the night and the day. So it creates this more constant temperature. So if it gets cold at night, it's holding on to the heat from the day and slowly letting it out. And then it's also sinking the heat or absorbing the heat during the day. So it's just making it a lot more even. This technology has mostly been lost though. We're trying to replace some of it, this area or this area right here. And it is really hard to find an artisan who knows how to do this. It is almost like an art installation in many ways. We have found 3 people that were able to do it, but then trying to get them the materials to do it and get them lined up to do it, and not just a carpenter job, is pretty tough. But we do plan on having one of these walls where we'll expose it, and usually plaster on top of it. And you can tell in historic preservation where the plaster work was, because there's marks on the wood, which is the wood post, what they call them, studs. They would mark those with like machete, so that the plaster would be able to bond to it better. Wood is really interesting to work with, because over time the cells in the wood start to pull apart on places that the wood is being put into tension, and it starts to compress in places that it has compression. But it takes a long time for the wood to do that. And so this house that was built in the 50s, the ceiling was sagging by over 4 inches from one side to the other when we pulled the line. And so we had to jack each one of these things up and create a truss to pull the whole ceiling back up. But you'll see that over the course of 60 years, this building really started to have its wood sagging on it. We see that a lot in historic preservation. So historically, wood and brick were materials that you really would use. But modern, you can get up to 4 floors with wood pretty easily. But if you want to go taller, you have to start using concrete and steel. Even this project right here, you'll see it's mostly wood, but the ground floor has a significant amount of steel that's been built into it. This project also has 74 drilled shafts at 20-foot deep. So if you think about it, that's about a quarter mile of drilled shafts, and there's a lot of concrete in those, and a lot of steel in those because you have to reinforce the concrete. The concrete is only good against compression; it's not good against tension. So you have to put the steel in it because steel is really good against tension. Not as much for compression, but does have some compression. So that's why you have the reinforced concrete. Brick, historically used really often. Now we use it more as a cladding in many cases. So it becomes kind of a rain screen where the water, if you have any water behind it, you have like a drip at the bottom. If you notice, a brick veneer wall always has weep holes at the bottom, so that if there's any moisture being trapped, especially when you're air conditioning a building, it'll start to get moisture because moisture is always going to go from hot to cold. So when we're air conditioning in the South, you always have the water trying to penetrate through the brick. The better insulation you have, usually the less moisture transfer you'll have, but you're still going to have a moisture transfer that's going to hit the back. Usually Tyvek, you'll see the Tyvek wrap. When people are building houses, that's essentially what's blocking the moisture, and so it has to come out somehow. So you have the brick obviously is clay that has been harvested from a clay pit and then fired in a kiln. It's also really great as a heat sink, so it's a great way to sort of create that microclimate inside of your building, even if you're just using it as a cladding on the outside of the structure. Historically, you would have seen it used more as structure, but they started doing more of the wood framing and the brick veneer probably mid 20th century is when you started seeing all of that. This building also, if you want to get taller or bigger spans, you can't just use wood or bricks, you have to use steel. This is the same building. This is on Kali Slough. Y'all probably noticed it. It's called Standard Title. This is looking from the back side of it. And when you have these types of spans, you have to use steel. So you'll see that these are steel tubing. And also even the stair is made out of steel, so you have the C channel inside. But the only way to really start to get bigger in the 20th century was to start using concrete and steel. So this is Vermillion Loss again. This is the first photo that I showed everyone. And just to kind of give you a breakdown of what it is, this is kind of a Louisiana typology historically that you would see. You would see courtyards in urban typologies where you would have loggia or loggia that are inside of that courtyard. So we have all of our egress and all of our circulation is within that courtyard space, similar to what you would see. But one thing that's interesting about this project is it also has a rain garden or a rainwater garden. So all of the water comes off of the roof and goes into the middle courtyard right here. So we're collecting all of the water, and then we have a French drain that's underneath the sandy soil. So the sandy soil just sucks that water down really, really quickly, and there's a perforated pipe that's run inside of some open aggregate with a geotech tile on the outside. And I'll show y'all a little bit more of the technology of that. But this actually cleans the water that comes off of the roof before it's being put back into the drainage system for the city of Lafayette. So this is something that we've done rain gardens in probably a half dozen projects now across the city, and I'm going to show y'all a couple of those. Again, we have a photographer, so he even likes to use the rain garden for some of his subjects, which is really interesting. So he was photographing her, and we just thought it was funny the fact that it's raining and they have her with the umbrella and she's standing in the rain garden. This is a rain garden that was kind of one of our earlier ones that doesn't necessarily have the same technology of the French drain. but it still cleans the water to a certain extent, maybe not as much as the other, because it is still passing through. These are Louisiana irises. Uh, this time of year, they're about to bloom. And if you go out there, this is much more full because they actually really propagate very quickly. And this time of year, you're going to start seeing the blooms coming up, and it's nothing but purple and yellow flowers like everywhere. And so we use it not just as detention, which is required in Lafayette Parish. You have to detain the water that comes onto your lot pre-development versus post-development. You have to detain that water and have the same runoff that you had previously. So we like to not just create a mosquito-infested detention pond in the back of a neighborhood, but turn it into a feature. So this is the same rain garden, but when you're in the conference room with this little bump out of glass that you can see right here, you start to feel almost like you're hanging out into that rain garden. So if y'all have a chance, y'all should drive to the back side of this building, especially in the next couple of weeks whenever the flowers start really blooming. This is a project also in downtown that we just sent out for bid. And this, you'll see, is we're taking it another step in the rain garden. And you'll see the topography. This is the grading plan. So the grading plan, you can see where the drainage is coming from the parking area at the back, as well as all of the rooftops of this building, which there's like 3 distinct rooftops on this one. They're all draining inside the building with the plumbing, and then they're coming out and daylighting into the rain garden in the middle. So to harvest the water from the rain garden, what we do is the perforated pipe, instead of just being one like French drain perforated pipe, this is a series. You can see the 3 different, like the dash line running left to right, as well as the dash line running plan north-south. Those are all perforated pipes, and 4-inch perforated pipes. You'll see in the detail right here the kind of how the soil mix that's called out, a little blurry, but the soil mix that's called out actually calls for a certain percentage of sand. And then right here, there's a geotech wrapping around some open aggregate limestone, which has been around the perforated pipe. And then if it has too much rain at one time, which obviously we get a lot in South Louisiana, especially in the summer, there is an overflow in the middle, but the overflow is slightly higher than, so it's to a point where you're not going to flood the building, where it'll start to drain into that as an overflow. And there's actually 2 ways of the water to overflow. We also use rain gardens in this project. So in the neighborhoods, you're required to detain your water. We actually created a playing field out of one where it's just a sunken area of lawn. And then also we created rain gardens that came where you can actually walk over areas. This is off of Pinhook. It's called Enclave. If you go just past College Saloon, if you go just past Barrow School Road, on Pinhook, it's to the right. If y'all wanted to go check that one out. Another thing that we've done, this is on University Avenue, just north of Congress. This is an open aggregate limestone. And one thing that's interesting about this is if you drive, and I really need to go take a video of this, if you're driving during a rain event, you'll see that the gutter is full of water in front of all of the houses because they have concrete driveways. And then when you get in front of this one, there's no water in front of it because this is an open aggregate and it's capturing all the water that's trying to run off, so that it's not overwhelming the street where you have gutter spray and like several inches of water in the gutter. Actually, between these houses, there's also an open paver system. So this project, we're actually LEED certified homes. LEED stands for Leadership in Energy Environmental Design. It's put out by the U.S. Green Building Council. It's a point system, so these got silver rating. Actually, the house on the left, the guy who purchased it after 9 months of utility bills calculated how much to get himself to a net zero, and he put solar panels up on the back side of the roof. So this is a net zero home in Lafayette that if y'all wanted to drive by it, it's on University, just north of Congress. By the way, the project right here also has the open aggregate and the parking. So it's sort of where we're putting those two types of projects together, where we're doing the French drain version of the rain garden as well as an open aggregate with a French drain underneath it. So we're really kind of taking it to another level. Each time we do a project, we don't want to overwhelm contractors with too much technology, but if we kind of understand it each time and get it a little bit better, so we're kind of honing it. One thing that we also always start off, and people don't realize this about most architects, but if you talk to any architect, they're really, really well aware of the sun and the sun angles. Sometimes the wind, but usually the sun. You'll notice that we always try to put a north arrow on our plans. You'll see even the north arrow on this is kind of hidden in the bottom corner. But the importance of the north arrow for us is to start to understand where is your glazing going to go in the building? What kind of shadows are you going to cast into certain spaces? This is the old Hotel Acadiana. It was more recently a Wyndham. This is on Pinhook, the 6-story building. So you start, when you get that high, you start to cast a lot of shadows. And you'll notice when we did the analysis on this existing building, the courtyard stays in the shade very often. The only time you're really getting a lot of sun in the courtyard, you'll see it at noon during the summer solstice. Usually when we do this type of analysis, we're going to look at the equinox, the solstice, and the summer and the winter solstice, as well as the equinox. Even though the equinox happens in March as well as September, we usually just put it for one because it's the same exact thing on both sides of the calendar, right? So we do a matrix of morning, noon, and evening, just so that we do the 9 different positions that you'll see. And obviously there is an infinite amount of in between of how the sun shines on this property. But we also look at the winds that are prevalent during that time period. You'll notice that most of the winds in our location in Lafayette are from the south. But you'll see in the winter, in December, you do have prevalent northern wind, actually slightly northeastern, and then you have a slightly southwestern wind for the majority of the year. That's mostly coming from the Gulf. You get Gulf breezes in the summer, and even in the spring, you'll start to see like a lot of southern wind being sucked up into these northern fronts. So you get a windy day for a couple of days this time of year. It's usually pulling up. The pressure is just pulling it out of the Gulf, so you get a really hot, humid day. And then a front comes through and it dries out, right? You go from really hot to really cold, really hot, really cold. That's this time of year. So all of that stuff weighs into the design of a project. And specifically on this project, they wanted to redo the pool in the courtyard, and this is turning into a multifamily project, about 150 dwelling units. It used to be about 300 key hotel. But we're redoing the pool in the courtyard, so we wanted to see where's the best place to position places for tanning, like tanning decks, but also where can we put a cabana, and what does that cabana look like, and what's the shade that it casts. I wish I would have put a slide of the cabana design, because we actually realized we could put it kind of in this area right here that's getting the sun, and it would block the sun from the windows that are all along this side. So we're actually creating more of a trellis cabana, where the shadows from the trellis show up on the ground, both outside as well as inside, because it's the light's passing through the windows along that side. So this sort of analysis can really help us from an environmental standpoint, understanding how to cast shadow on glazing so that you don't have as much heat gain, at least in South Louisiana, that's a big deal. In some parts of the country or in the world, you probably want to expose your sun to you want to expose your glazing to the sun more so that you warm it up. You can even calculate the overhang of a building to where in the summer you're blocking the sun from coming in, but in the winter you have the sun because it's lower in the sky. It warms up the building. So one thing we also use sun for. This is a project that is about to break ground. It's a courthouse for the Tunica Biloxi Indians in Marksville. And so what we did was we created this sunscreen at the top. This is not the actual what the building actually looks like. It's just more of a model. But we were modeling this, putting it in the exact location in the world in the model so that it knows what the sun looks like and what the angles are, and even oriented it to the north south the orientation that it will be in real life to test the sun on this screen. And the screen was created out of terracotta baguettes. That the terracotta, we use a scripting program to be able to mimic some of the patterns that you see in archaeological finds from this tribe. And so over the course of the day, you get this, start it over again. You get the shadows that pass across the facade of the building, and it's mimicking that pattern. But at the same time, what's interesting about this tribe is the early French settlers would refer to them as the Sun People. So we're using the sun in a very modern way, and using a pattern that came from archaeological finds of their tribe to do a more modern take on it. But like I said, the sun is really important. The other thing that obviously environmentally in Louisiana is a big deal is hurricanes. So we have to design for pressures on our buildings to make sure that the building doesn't fall over. It's not only protecting the property, but also protecting life and safety. So in the International Building Code, you'll find this page. This is the wind requirements. So you'll see that we actually fall into 130 wind zone in Lafayette. But if you get closer to the coast, you'll see, like if you're way out in Plaquemine Parish, you're in a 170 wind zone. So you have to design for a lot more wind because you have the potential for that type of wind from the hurricanes that come by. Even in Miami, usually you'll see in building materials, if it's Miami-Dade certified, the Miami-Dade County, long before the IBC was even looking at wind codes, they were sort of setting the standard because they are out on a peninsula, out in the middle of the Atlantic and Gulf. So they had to design early on for those types of wind loads. The other thing about hurricanes in South Louisiana is the loss of wetlands, which protect against hurricanes. And you can see this is down in, I think this is Plaquemine Parish. Actually, no, this is probably Jefferson Parish. But it's you get to a point where whenever I was a kid, was probably when y'all were kids, was like all marshland. And now it's like completely exposed out there. So it's a reality that we have to face in the built environment as well. They had major lawsuits that were involved in the cutting of canals and not maintaining these canals from the oil and gas companies. And this has become a big deal because when they cut these canals, you had a lot of saltwater intrusion, and they never maintained the banks of them. So it created more and more saltwater intrusion, which killed off the marshes. This is probably, most scientists will say that this is the majority of the reason why we're losing the wetlands, but we also obviously have climate change with sea level rise, as well as the subsidence that's happening, and we've levied off the Mississippi. And so you're not replenishing those soils that that were coming down in the delta. So this is a FEMA flood map. You see, these are really important to architects because this is one of the first things we have to go and look at is, are you in a flood zone? What is your flood zone? Or are you in a floodway? So the hatching right here is a floodway. And the difference between what we call a floodway and a flood zone is a floodway, you have to calculate to make sure it's a no rise, which means you can inhibit flow of water and flood other people if you put a structure within the floodway. So the flood, you have to go and calculate that water. Usually a hydraulic engineer, some civil engineers can do that, and you get what they call a no rise certificate. If you're in the flood zone, which is the green section right here, as well as the pink, the 100-year flood zone is the green, and the 500-year flood zone is the pink. The year thing really doesn't make much of a difference because we're seeing like every 5 or 6 years the 100-year flood, and every like 15, 20 years the 500-year flood. And they're just going to get more and more often with climate change and the extreme swings in temperature, which those extreme swings in temperature also create more precipitation, at least more precipitation at a given time. So for instance, for an example, this is a project that we're working on along with a firm out of San Antonio called Lake Plato. And this is some analysis that was being done on this old trapeze cannery on the Vermilion River. You'll see the Vermilion River has a floodway associated with it in the dark blue, and then the sort of the medium blue is the 100-year flood, and the light blue is the 500-year flood. Well, you'll see that there was originally a coulee that's coming in at the top, and still sits in the 100-year flood zone. So this is something that we usually have to look at, as well as the base flood elevation height going up and down the stream, the river. So the interesting part about the Vermilion River in Lafayette is the river actually can flow north instead of just flowing south into the bay. It will reverse courses, partially because it's just so flat that if you get a lot of rain, it'll start to back up into other marshland. And so the base flood elevations have to be taken from both directions. So you end up having a design in between. Usually we go 1 foot above the base flood elevation, but sometimes you can meet at somewhere around six inches only, based on what direction it's going. So this is that project. If y'all are not familiar with it, this is the old trapeze cannery, and it's about 180,000 square feet on the roof. A 23-acre site that has been master planning with Lake Plato out of San Antonio. We also are partnered with Marcel Wisnia Architecture and Development out of New Orleans on the development side of this. This is inside of one of the. This was originally the cannery, and then later with storage. This was a fermenting for okra, where they would ferment in these big barrels, cypress barrels, and they would heat it up from below. And after a couple of weeks of the fermentation process, all of the okra would start to float to the top, and then it would fall in the flue, and then go to the canning side, or I guess the pickling side on the left side of the photo. Just to give you a little bit of context of where this is located, you can see it's about a mile from downtown Lafayette, and a little less than a mile from where we are right now on the university campus. And this is part of the design team with as well as the architects from San Antonio and the landscape architects who are based out of Houston called OJ. One thing that's interesting about this project is it grew very fast. It was originally only 23 acres as a trapeze project. We went to the city and said, hey, while we're master planning this, can we help with master planning Beaver Park? Because there was talk of putting a pedestrian bridge. and then the city ended up growing it all the way to master plan in Cayenne Park as well. And they've already funded 2 bridges, pedestrian bridges that are going to be connecting traffic to Beaver Park as well as Vermillion to Hyman Park, so you'll be able to walk or bike across these sort of, I guess, these 4 different areas: Hyman, Vermilionville, Beaver, and Traffic. And this is one of the renderings. It's slowly changing because we're in the middle of the design process. And when we talk about environmentalism too, there's the talk of how you transport yourself, or if it's by foot, by bike, by mass transit. So we worked on a project for the city of Lafayette, and this is more on the urban design side than it is on the architecture side. But what's interesting about it is it wasn't about creating space as much as it was about changing people's perception of space. And so it's called Route Lafayette, and it is a bilingual wayfinding system in Louisiana French and English. And it's for the park, for going by foot, as well as bike, transit, and then also the public buildings, so that they have this cohesive signage as well as wayfinding to let people know how many minute walk or how many minute bike to a certain asset for the community. And this is being implemented right now. You'll probably see there's about 20 or so of these that are either out there or being put up in the next week. We're actually having a ribbon cutting for it on Friday. And they even have the French consul coming in town for it. The mayor is going to be there. But it's about the concept of showing people just how close things are. Because we're such an automobile oriented city, people don't realize that in the urban core, which was built pre-automobile, it's actually a very walkable city. If you visit walkscore.com, you can put in addresses in Lafayette and just see how walkable it is. When you get to the newly developed places, your walk score is going to be a lot lower. But if you put in stuff that's near the university or near downtown, you usually get in the high 80s or low 90s. Walk score will tell you when you hit 90 and higher, it's walker's paradise. We put in our office location, which is actually right here, where you are. And we have a walk score of 91. But I was saying earlier, that's part of our mission, is to take on projects that improve our community. One of the other things that we started looking at more recently is bicycle infrastructure. So the city hired us to do a master plan for bicycle. And we were also talking about the State Department of Transportation came up with a plan for I-49 going through Lafayette, and then they were creating a boulevard out of the southbound portion of Evangeline Thruway and renaming it Evangeline Boulevard, slowing the traffic down. But the design actually was very automobile centric and really would have just been about speeding cars through, which the whole point that we saw of elevating the structure, and it was sold to the community that it was a way to also stitch underneath that elevated structure back the original plan that they had, that was more of a walking, I guess at the time, horse and carriage city. So we just proposed that their typical section should look a little bit more like this, where you have separated bike pathways rather than a painted bike gutter, and that you also had plenty of room for sidewalks. And on this particular section, we even showed that bikes and pedestrians could go across a detention area in the median. That would be like a boardwalk as a way to cross. So, and in that bike, starting off doing the bike master plan, which we're only a little ways in, we start off with doing mappings. I'm sure y'all are familiar with lots of mappings from geology or soil maps. So some of the maps we usually look at are a lot different from those, but you know from maps that you can see things totally differently if you just pull out a certain piece of information. So on this particular mapping, when we started off, we wanted to look at the tree canopy because we were thinking about how do you expand the amount of time that people would be comfortable riding their bicycle in the hot, humid South Louisiana. And we realized that one of the easiest ways was to increase your tree canopy because it would lower the temperature, at least the average temperature at that location. So we started looking at the tree canopy, but we also looked at the poverty rate. So this is the greener it is, or the darker green it is, the higher percentage of tree canopy you'll see along the river. Those are usually almost 100%, between 90 and 100% tree coverage. But then you get out into this area, kind of near the edge of Scott, at the actually Scott here. So this area, like along I-10, Scott exit, University exit, you'll notice that it's got a lot less trees, but you'll also see like downtown kind of stands out, some of the areas nearby. But then when we looked at poverty rates, there was actually a major overlap if you look at this. This is based on the most recent census and by census tract, as well as the percentage of tree canopy coverage. By the way, this comes from treeequityscore.com. So I talked about walk score, but there's also tree equity score. So this might be an interesting website y'all can explore.